Yo, have you heard about Anchor? It's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. It's free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Welcome, everyone, to the L7C podcast. Today, we have a jam-packed episode for you all today. Today, we have the queen herself, Chelsea Police, with us. How are you doing today, ma'am?
I am doing well. Excited for what we have in store for everyone today.
Yeah, and we are recording. It is March, so it is Women's History Month. So happy Women's History Month. If this is the first podcast you are listening to in the month of March, just wanted to make sure we got that out there. And yeah, we have so much that we are about to be getting into today. And we're just going to dive right into it since we have so much to cover. Begrudgingly to Chelsea, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers won the Super Bowl. Tom Brady got another Super Bowl and a Super Bowl MVP. And with him winning his 7th Super Bowl, you guys can't see, but she's not happy. With him winning his 7th, a lot of things came out that night, that week. And it was all centered around Tom Brady. And we eclipsed the greatest NFL player, the greatest quarterback of all time, to now saying that Tom Brady is potentially the greatest GOAT of all time. So the GOAT of GOAT and the greatest athlete of all time. So that obviously caused a huge stir. People saying they agree, saying they don't. People bringing up the different sports. And then we went from that. The first people who really brought it out was The Athletic, and then ESPN, Undefeated, all of them, 5038, all followed through. Then Sports Center, a couple weeks after that, posted this picture. You guys won't see it, so I'll describe it for you. With so many GOATs, who's your GOAT? Right in front was Michael Jordan. And then you had Tom Brady in the front as well. You have LeBron James in the front, Muhammad Ali in the front, Floyd Mayweather in the front. Behind Tom Brady, you have someone, Tiger Woods. And then if you squint down and you see people, you see Cristiano Ronaldo, Lionel Messi in the back. You even see, I think, Roger Federer in the back. And then in the way back was Serena Williams. And this caused another Omega stir in the sports world of her being in the backpack that you have to squint to see her. Me, who I have glasses, and I had to look real close to see her. And a mission of other women who weren't on there, Simone Biles, had issue with that, saying that she could think of a whole bunch of women who should be on there. And it got really bad that SportsCenter actually deleted that tweet. Luckily for us, the internet is forever, so we were able to get a screenshot of it. So, with that being said, Chelsea, I already know you do not like Tom Brady, but you are a sports fanatic, and you know what his accomplishments mean to the game of football. But what did you think about everyone now saying he is the GOAT of GOATs in this whole controversy that happened?
So my feelings about Tom Brady aside, I have always been someone that has said I don't like him for various reasons. Number one being that he's a cheater. We know what has happened with Spygate some other things that have happened in the Patriots organization, etc. So all of that aside, I still, putting any biases that I have towards Tom Brady aside, not thinking about those, I still don't think he's the GOAT of GOATs. Yes, he has accomplished a ton as an NFL quarterback, as an athlete, but we have to consider the fact that he does it on a team. Now, there are a lot of things that he probably does in terms of preparation, making sure that he's the best at what he does, but he also relies so heavily on other individuals to be successful. And that's not to say that that doesn't make you a great athlete, but we think about other instances. Number one, Serena Williams. What she's accomplished on her own is incredible. She has 23 Grand Slam titles, all singles. She has titles with her sisters or with her sister Venus. Just incredible things. Same thing with Simone. Yes, she has some team gold medals, but the number of individual medals that she has won is incredible. And that's because of her own physical ability, her dominance of the sport that she competes in, that she doesn't have to rely on anybody else. And even more so with Simone, her own international federation has done plenty to make sure that she doesn't exceed her competition. Some of the skills that are named after her have been severely undervalued because the FIG, the federal or the International Federation for Gymnastics, says that they're too dangerous and that gymnasts shouldn't be encouraged to attempt some of those skills. And so, number one, that tells me that she should be at the top of that conversation in terms of GOATs. Same with Serena Williams. And that's not even, the pinnacle of it. Yes, there are some great men's athletes out there that could make the same argument. Michael Phelps, for instance, he has the most gold medals of any swimmer anywhere. And so I think the problem that I have the most with these conversations is, number one, it's really difficult to compare across sports, but we also have to consider what, individual athletes have to do on their own compared to those who compete on teams. And so for someone to say that Tom Brady is the absolute GOAT, he's the best athlete to ever live, I think that's really unfair. And I would say that for any football player, to be honest, because it's so different when you're playing on a team. And Tom Brady could have a shit season, but he could come out and win the Super Bowl because everybody else around him plays really well, or their defense plays really well, and he has no impact on that. So it's a tough conversation, and I understand why some people have that when looking at just his accolades alone. But when you don't have people like Serena Williams or Simone Biles or even Katie Ledecky in that conversation, then you need to reevaluate what you're using as your criteria to define who is the GOAT of GOATs in this instance.
Yeah, with Tom Brady's thing, because obviously it happened right after he won the Super Bowl, and then, it's never going to happen again. 10 Super Bowl appearances, 7 wins. That's just not going to happen. And I know the NFL aficionados, they talked about just how hard to put it in layman's terms, because we know it's a salary cap league. You can't go out and get all the best players like you could in baseball. And for him to do what he did, that's what came out to be. My biggest problem was that it became two different things. It was the greatest of the greatest and then the greatest athlete. And I wanted to know what they're defining as an athlete, because if we're just talking about the core basis of an athlete, physical strength, speed, agility, Tom Brady is nowhere near that. To be honest, there's a lot of people who've been listed who are not the fastest in the world. The only person who can claim he's the fastest person ever, who is another person who wasn't mentioned, was Usain Bolt. He can claim that he is the fastest human being that God ever created. It is fact. There's numbers behind it, everything. He can claim that he wasn't someone listed. So that one, I don't understand how he went to greatest athlete on that. Now, the GOAT of GOATs thing, that is like a lot of things. It's your personal preference. If whoever you put on top is whoever you put on top. But the omission of the women, I think, was the biggest problem. Like, I'm still looking at that ESPN picture right now, and the fact that Serena is in the backpack behind Floyd, and is looking like, when I zoomed in, I think it's Federer and Nadal who are next to her, but they're in the backpack. So I didn't understand why. One, there's only one female and she's in the backpack. I 100% understand why Michael Jordan is in the front and Muhammad Ali and all of that, but I don't even understand why Serena is way in the back behind Floyd. That confused me, and Simone not being on it too. That goes to a bigger thing of maybe it's the sport that she plays. And we've talked about this before, that the sport that she plays, most casual people only care about it once every 4 years. Once the Olympics comes, everyone on earth is magically Team Simone Biles. Everyone on earth for that time period. Then once the Olympics are over, they're criticizing her for doing a commercial with someone from Queer Eye. Those are the same type of people. So those are the problems that I had with it. I also had a problem with seeing people's definitions of why they put so-and-so in front of so-and-so. And each person on this, just from this picture, and you already talked about Simone, like, there are moves that are illegal because she's the only one on planet Earth who can do. But everyone on this picture affected the sport some way and another in a different way. Obviously, Michael Jordan, I mean, he was the first athlete billionaire, and his record and all that stuff speaks for itself. And what he's done for sports in North America to make it more worldwide, especially the NBA, I mean, that's a given. Muhammad Ali is a given. I mean, if I really had to objectively, I would personally pick Muhammad. Serena, 23. If you just said 23 championships, just think of it as 23 championships. And obviously, one of the more famous ones that she won when she was 7 months pregnant.
6 weeks. 6 weeks.
6 weeks pregnant. And then another person who, I mean, who's not even on this picture, another Olympic sport besides Simone and Usain, Michael Phelps is nowhere to be found, and he's the most decorated Olympian. And you would think that the person who's the most decorated in the only contest that has everyone literally the best in the world would be on there, but he's not. But honestly, with the Sports Center thing, I think it's more of the sports they cover that were on the front. I mean, obviously, they have the partnership with the NBA, the NFL, boxing. They really don't have anything with golf, but Tiger's Tiger. Soccer is in the way back because they don't do anything with soccer. And tennis and stuff is in the way back because they don't do anything really with tennis. And you think of other people like Wayne Gretzky who should be on there. And so those are the type of things where I was more mad that there was less women on that. And we even talked about, if you wanted to include everyone, you could have just done 2 pictures. You could have had that picture and then another picture.
I think it's important to note, though, that picture actually is like fan art. So that wasn't created by Sports Center. It was grabbed from somebody else who created that. So I do think that that's important to know in this conversation. So this was a fan's interpretation of the GOAT. Now, what I find really irritating with Sports Center is that they took this and again said, who's your GOAT of GOATs? Like, had this conversation and put this out on Twitter, and not even considering the fact that there is one female athlete that's featured on this. And to be perfectly honest, when you look at the photo, if you didn't know that was Serena Williams, you would not recognize her. It doesn't look like her at all. And again, it's a fan interpretation. Maybe they drew it, they, did whatever with it. And so it didn't come from Sports Center specifically. But I think it does a massive disservice that they retweeted or used this individual's image and didn't even consider the fact that people would be upset by the lack of female representation in it. Now, again, if that's that fan's particular, opinion on the idea of the GOAT, that's their opinion. That's fine. But for a major sports outlet to not even think twice about that and the possibility that there would be backlash, that's where I have a massive problem. I think that, again, we go back to this over and over again about the lack of coverage for women's sports and people just suddenly forgetting that women's sports even exist. This is a prime example, and it could have easily have been something where SportsCenter framed this in a very different way, didn't use that terminology, gave the artist credit for what it is that they did, and said, hey, but we have these other individuals that are great athletes too, or something along those lines, or even ask the artists to do another picture with some of the greatest female athletes in the world as well. So I think that it is SportsCenter's fault in that respect, that they didn't think through the fact that people would be upset that there wasn't more female representation and that it wouldn't be scrutinized. And for Simone to come out and say, hey, there are so many women that could have been featured in this picture. And then she even went on the Today Show and they asked her about it. They talked about it. And she listed some athletes that she thought should be on there, from Katie Ledecky to Alex Morgan to Simone Manuel, several others. And she didn't even name herself. That says a lot about her. And she knows she's accomplished a lot in the sport of gymnastics. But she was like, there are so many other women that deserve to be a part of this conversation. And for SportsCenter not even to, acknowledge that or even put out, some kind of a statement saying we recognize what we did and that we're working to improve and understand that women's sports do exist and that representation matters. And, kind of, as cookie cutter as that sounds, they do need to take some ownership in the backlash beyond just simply deleting the tweet and saying, whoops, we messed up, but we're not going to say anything else beyond that.
Yeah, a couple things. One, that's good on you to note that it was a fan who made the picture. But with that too, I don't know how that works too with major labels and whatnot. Do they just take it, then credit them, or they message them saying, hey, this is ESPN, we want to use your picture? So we don't know the conversation with that. Maybe he or she, because whoever it was, asked to did you want me to make another one? Oh no, this is fine. So if you didn't look at the fine print, you wouldn't even know that it was made by someone else. But I mean, they used it as their own. Like you said, they asked the question, who's the GOAT of GOATs? Before my other thing, side point, you said Simone named Alex Morgan.
Or maybe it was Megan Rapinoe. It was a soccer player.
I was going to ask, are either of them, in your objective opinion, are either of them better than Mia? I would think Mia would be on before either of those two.
Yeah, and I think
this is just objective, just asking.
Yeah. And I think it's a generational thing. She probably, and I don't want to speak for her, obviously, but if she's not a soccer fan now, or she's slowly becoming a soccer fan, she probably didn't, watch Mia play or have any, kind of relationship to her as a player. And so it could just be, these are the athletes that I see today that should be in that conversation. And again, it could just be that she's not super familiar with Mia and her playing style. But yeah, I think that's a conversation that is hard to have, number one, because women's soccer was so different back then. But I do think that, Mia Hamm should most certainly be in that conversation. I mean, she is my idol. She is who I watched growing up and wanted to be like. And so, and Simone and I aren't that far in age. I'm a few years older than she is. And so when I was watching Mia, I was pretty young. So, that next generation may really be who Simone knows more than some of the older players, or the 99ers as they're, known as. So it could just be more of a generational thing rather than an all out, I think that these players are better than Mia or anybody else that was on that 1999 World Cup team.
Yeah, and then my other thing that I had a huge issue with all of this stuff is once you get in that rabbit hole on Twitter and reading the comments and reading them from both, when people were saying like Simone this and Trina that, which I was fine with, or people saying, well, they think it's LeBron or they think it's Michael, which I'm fine with too. But seeing some of the reasoning, I thought was god awful. Um, if someone like it was some people who was like, oh, it's Serena, and it's Serena because this and this, and Michael Jordan wasn't good anyway. I was like, well, you just discredit yourself, so I'm not going to take your opinion. Or it's like, oh, it's LeBron James, this is this, but gymnastics is easy, so it's not someone else. Like, well, you just discredit yourself, so I'm not going to take like your opinion. So I'm just when I'm looking at it, I get it. Everyone has their favorites, but I think the point of this too is if you don't pay respect to what all these people have done, then you're no better than the people coming at your person.
Yeah, I think my favorite comment in some of those was, talking about Simone and Tom Brady. And someone was like, yeah, Simone Biles could totally go out on the field and throw a football. I would love to see Tom Brady get on, a 4-inch piece of wood and do, 3 back handsprings. Like, that's clearly not going to happen. Like, he's not going to be able to do that. So don't come at me and talk about how he's the greatest athlete when he wouldn't be able to do something like that. I wouldn't be able to do something like that. So I think, it's hard again to compare sport to sport, but I do think that is a valid argument where, you can't just go out and be a gymnast. Like these athletes train from the time that they're, 3, 4, 5 years old and become Olympians by the time they're 16, 17, 18. I mean, Simone's still competing at 23, which in gymnastics is considered old. So, it's hard to compare, but I think that says a lot about the intensity and the caliber of athlete that you need to be in order to be able to do that. And their training schedules are just ridiculous. Yes, Tom Brady probably, practices a lot, but not to the extent that some of these gymnasts do and the work that they put in and all of that stuff. So again, it's comparing apples to oranges, but at the end of the day, if you ask me who is a better athlete, a gymnast or an NFL player, I'm going to say gymnast 900 times. Like I'm not going to ever give that to the football player because it's just not. There's no comparison in my mind.
Yeah. I just want to also because I just shout out the track people, but also wanted to shout out the strong men and women. They're athletes as well, and no one on this list is someone who's pushing tractors and all that stuff. And like the top CrossFit people in the world, they're like almost the epitome of what an athlete is because they're able to do so many things. I just wanted to shout them out and give them love too. And I honestly think like the rankings of goats, that's really personal preference. Like I think we would have who was just off top, who was your goat of goats if you even have one?
Oh, that's so tough. And, I could give you probably 100 different lists for various reasons. I really think that I would have to give it to Simone. Like there just is no one else like her. And, she hasn't lost a world championship since, she was 13 or something ridiculous. For the last 10 years, she hasn't lost in all around competition. And, that to me just is mind blowing that she is successful still today, but not just successful, but she continues to get better. Like she did an interview recently with 60 Minutes and said that there's a possibility that there are going to be 2 more skills named after her after this Olympic cycle. Like that's insane. Most gymnasts probably don't have a skill named after them at all. And now she's going to have 5 or 6. And to me, that just screams GOAT. And there's going to be nobody else like her. But the reality is she's paved the way for a lot of gymnasts. The diversity. I just watched the World or the Winter Cup this weekend, and the number of African American gymnasts is significantly higher. And I think that's a lot to do with her and also Gabby Douglas and just showing those little girls that someone who looks like them has been successful in this sport and you can be successful too. So, again, it's a tough conversation, and I could give you a million reasons why it's Simone. I could give you a million reasons why it's Serena or anybody else, but it's one of those things that it's very personal to you, and it really comes down to what sport you watch, what knowledge you have, and how you truly frame this idea of being the greatest of all time, whether it's on the field, whether it's off the field. And for me, I think Simone and Serena, to some degree, they do a lot of work in their respective sports, but it's what they do off the court and what they do outside of the gym that I think makes them so special in that respect.
Yeah, I think for me, objectively, because this is just the age-old Mount Rushmore thing, and I tell people all the time not to get offended by Mount Rushmores because there's only 4 spots. You're going to leave someone out, and that's okay. It's like a personal thing. My 3 have been set for a long time. It's always been Ali, Jordan, Serena. The 4th one, which is always the hardest on Mount Rushmore, is always up for debate. But I feel like those 3 just change not just their sports, but sports in general for a multitude of different reasons. Now, one who is this isn't objective, my personal favorite GOAT of GOATs, he was a GOAT at the time, would have been, it is Jesse Owens. And the reason being is that me and you joke about all the time how people can't take the heat on Twitter and delete tweets and all of that stuff. And we talked about representation with Simone, with African-American women and all that, but no one, and I saw it and I've watched stuff, no one could tell me different that Jesse Owens, a black man, went to not just any Olympics, he went to Adolf Hitler's Olympics and won 4 gold medals. That to me is probably the greatest accomplishment, me personally, just because it's Adolf freaking Hitler. Come on, guys. And him doing that in front of Hitler and all those people, I mean, there'll be no accomplishment to me personally that's bigger than what he did. That's a personal thing. Objectively, it's those 3 and whoever you want to throw in.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. Like, we all have our own experiences and things in sport that matter to us and affect us all in different ways. And so, something like that, for you, that's a representation thing. And that's something that, people probably said he couldn't do, or, Hitler said, we're going to come out and we're going to beat him. And, that obviously didn't happen, but for someone else that may not be in their purview in the same way. And so, people who have these opinions about, the greatest of all time and who the best athletes are, you do have to consider what their perspective is and what it means to that individual to see, someone who looks like you or, plays the same sport as you or whatever it is, or how they've influenced you personally to take that role. So, I'm not the biggest basketball fan. So, I know that Jordan and LeBron have both done some really great things for the sport of basketball. But, to be perfectly honest, they're probably not up in my top just because I'm not attached to basketball that much. And while, yes, I know some of the great things that they've done, they're just not the first people I think of. And so, someone's going to say, well, you have that completely discredits you because you don't know or you don't understand what they've done. And I think that's unfair because, yes, I do recognize, what Michael Jordan did and what LeBron's done and continues to do for himself on the basketball court, but also off the court. But again, it just comes down to what my perspective is and where I spend my time in terms of sport. And to be perfectly honest, I spend a lot of time watching women's sports and soccer and some of those other things. And so, I certainly don't think certain soccer players deserve to be in that conversation. But again, that's from an American's perspective, where soccer hasn't and still doesn't continue to be a popular sport. It's growing and it's becoming more popular and We're seeing a lot more Americans go overseas and play professionally, which I think is great. But until that happens on a regular basis, until we grow the sport of soccer itself, American soccer players are never going to be in that conversation. And so again, like it really just comes down to where you situate yourself in this conversation in the world of sports for you to make that judgment and that call. So if someone, for instance, never watches a women's sport, they're never going to mention a woman in their top 5, top 4, however you're framing it. So that makes a lot of sense in their minds. In my mind, that doesn't make sense. But again, it's where you situate yourself and it's how you consume and understand sport for you to be able to make those decisions about who's the best.
Yeah, and what you said, I just want to go back to my point earlier that what you just said, it doesn't discredit you. Like when you were just talking about LeBron and MJ, that doesn't discredit you because you just said you don't watch, you're not like in tune with basketball, but you understand what they've both done. What discredits someone is that you say, like I said earlier, oh, Serena and Simone are the goat of goats because these people suck. That's when you're just like, that's when you should read up. And then if after you know what they've done and you still say that, then that's fine. But just don't say they suck and you've never watched or even know what they've done. Those are the fast sports fans who say, oh, Serena's the GOAT because LeBron James never won a title. Those are idiots. But yeah, it's an interesting thing and it's going to continue going on. If the Lakers win the championship this year and LeBron has 5 titles, it'll be brought back right up again. So it'll be a continuous thing. And God forbid if Tom Brady gets number 8, then it's really gonna ramp up, but we'll see going forward. But another thing that we have been covering forever, the Atlanta Dream, the WNBA team, was finally sold, which, God, we've been covering this since they revolted, wore the shirts. People like, speaking of him, LeBron, thinking about trying to buy the team with a group, and they sold around February 26th, actually. And Chelsea, what do you think about them being sold? We thought it might happen, but it actually did happen.
I am thrilled. I think this is absolutely incredible. I think this sends an incredibly powerful message to people who don't have open minds, who are, continually being bigots, for lack of a better term, I guess, that there's no place for it in the WNBA. And I honestly cannot even get over how great this is. Like for the WNBA to take such a strong stand to help flip the Senate, and then ultimately have this big of an impact to the point that they caused this individual to sell her shares, her stake in the team, is unbelievable. Like, and I don't say unbelievable in the fact that I think that the WNBA couldn't get it done, because they have shown time and time again that they are at the forefront of social justice and, this great effort to improve the game of basketball, not just from a playing perspective, but from a social and just progressive manner. I'm talking unbelievable in the fact that it happened, and it happened so quickly. And it really comes down to the WNBA just knowing exactly what it is they want and what they want their league to be like, and not taking no for an answer. To me, I don't think there's any better way for an organization to move forward than for the team or the players and teams to have that much of an impact, where they knew that if this individual stayed within the organization, they weren't going to tolerate it. And if that means they weren't going to play, you better believe those players were going to sit down and not play, because they truly believe in what it is they stand for and what it is they want to see out of, their platforms and their just, I guess, pull and messages that they send, like it's incredible. And, to see this go from start to finish has been awesome. And I hope that it sends a clear message to everybody that the WNBA is here to stay and that they have a very clear idea about what it is they want to do with the league and who's going to be involved and who's not going to be involved in that respect. And again, like I can't say enough great things about them and what they were able to accomplish. It's awesome. I mean, there's not much more I can say at that point.
So the commissioner, Katie Engelbert, said over the summer that they weren't going to force Kelly to sell her stake, which I'm actually not that I don't want to say I'm not a fan of, but I don't want to say I am a fan of. The reason being because I don't know if I'm into people telling you to share something that you've bought. I mean, sell something you bought. Reason being that if ideals shift, then you're going to have, like, if the commissioner was like anti Black Lives Matter and an owner was pro, then they'll be like, well, nope, you got to like sell your team, like things like that. So that's what I always think about when these type of things happen. But that didn't stop them from looking for partners and stuff like that. And the three people who are a part of it, I'm going to butcher their names extremely hard, so I'm not going to say last names. But Mr. Larry, he's a chairman of a real estate equity firm in Northland. So really wasn't going to try that name. Miss Suzanne, who's that firm's chief operating officer. And the biggest one, which shocked everyone, the former WNBA star Renee Montgomery. So she used to be a former player, and now he is an ownership of this team. And to my knowledge, like a majority shareholder. Larry Holt, he's the biggest one, but Renee being a majority shareholder, I don't think there's been a majority shareholder in a U.S. team athlete-wise besides Michael Jordan. So again, if we're doing the goat of ghosts thing, if you're like, oh, I'm up there with like a goat owning a team. So I think that's really cool. And then this whole process that we've been following since the very beginning. And my biggest thing with all of this is that Mary Brock, who was like the main owner of it, she was silent the whole time. I know from looking at like her stuff, like her and Kelly were like personal friends, but she never said anything. And like when you look up Mary Brock, I mean, she's on the board of trustees of Spelman College, which you would think it's completely against what Kelly was talking about. And I even looked on both Kelly and Mary's LinkedIn's today, and they still have owner of the Atlanta Dream on there. So that definitely needs to get changed. But no, this showed to me that the shut up and dribble era is officially dead. I think that athletes now are, I mean, I don't want to say more socially conscious, but they're allowed to speak on it more. Like it's not something that you're in fear of your job or anything like that, that people in the 90s and 80s had. They have social media to express their outlets, they have everywhere. So this just shows that players have power and they can change elections and things of that nature. And for government parties, Republican, Democrats, independents, or whatever, they got to pay attention to that because they have their fan bases who will follow them to the depths of earth. And you just saw what happened. And I feel like, honestly, which kind of pisses me off, is that this should be an Omega major story. I almost felt like if you weren't listening to our previous podcast, make sure you do. If you weren't doing that or just keeping tabs on it, you would not know this happened. And that kind of irritates me because this should have been front page, first topic on First Take on ESPN, first topic on Undisputed on Fox or Colin Cowherd or PTI, all that stuff. And Me personally, I don't think I've seen it on any of those type of shows. I've just seen it like a little glimpse on SportsCenter once.
Yeah. And to kind of go back to your comment about the commissioner and her statement on all of this, I do agree with you that the league shouldn't be able to just force you to sell to some degree. But I think that there is, something to be said if you're, as an owner, not upholding the values and the mission of the organization. And I think in this case with Kelly and her stake in some of the things that she's said and done, she 100% does not uphold the values and the mission of the league. And I think that should give the commissioner or, the other owners the right to, say that she should sell or kind of put that process in motion. Clearly, something happened because ultimately the team was sold, and I'm not really sure what happened behind closed doors and whether there was a conversation that was had or how that all came to be. But I do think that at some point that the commissioner needs to kind of hop in and say, yes, we want these owners and we need these owners, but not at the detriment to our players, or, their own personal feelings shouldn't be at the forefront of, what happens in the league. And for her to come out specifically against the Black Lives Matter movement and racial injustice and all of that stuff, like, that's kind of like, are you serious? Like, that's a moment where, like, even if that's how you feel, one, don't agree with that, that perspective. But if that's how you feel, just keep it to yourself. Don't open your mouth. Don't be stupid about it. Like, and then you can keep your team and keep making money. Like, it's one of those things like that she just was really dumb about how she went about this. And if she would have kept her mouth shut like her co-owner did, then, maybe we wouldn't be in this situation. Obviously, the other owner, sold as well. But, it could be that because she was tied to this former senator that she just felt like she needed to get out also because they were so closely linked. I don't know. But, I think that she clearly was not very smart about how she went about this. And we've talked about this in past podcasts. But yeah, I mean, I'm happy to see her go. I don't think she belongs in the WNBA, and the players made that very, very clear. And obviously we saw action. And again, I think that's great. And, to go back to it not being a major story, unfortunately, I'm not surprised. You and I both know that women receive less than 4% of all media coverage. And, it's just another one of those things. Like, it's going to be on Twitter, and the people who are passionate about the WNBA and women's sports are going to talk about it. And everybody else is just going to be like, meh, whatever, and move on. And so I'm not surprised, but also it's really frustrating because it should be a top story and it should be something that's being celebrated in the sport industry because it's so unique. And, honestly, I think I would love to do a case study on this because it's just something that's never really been seen before or experienced before. And I think it's something that needs to be looked into further.
A couple of things on this one before we wrap this one up. Number one, to go back to Kelly, and we talk about this all the time, that I know how IT's taken over the world, technology, all that, but man, if there's a career anyone listening to this that you might want to think about that you might make a lot of money, PR, because whoever helps these people with PR are terrible. Kelly, like you already said, if she didn't care for the Black Lives Matter movement, that's her personal thing, whatever. I can't change what's in a person's heart, whatever. But you got to know that that's going to ruffle a lot of feathers, especially where you're at. And for you to just say it out loud, open, all of that in the middle of not just your election year, but a presidential election year, that just doesn't help you. And I don't even disagree with her part about like politics and sports. I get it. Back in the day, you were always raised. There's things you never talked about at like Thanksgiving. You never talked about exes and politics just because you didn't want food flying over. It was supposed to be calm stuff about family. That's how our generation and previous ones were raised like that. And obviously now people are talking about politics and stuff more openly with their families. And before all of this stuff, I would have been like, I don't know if I really want politics and sports either, because sports is supposed to be a unifier and politics are the complete opposite. They're a divider. But when you bring up the point that it's okay for these athletes to donate millions and trillions of dollars to political stuff for them not get to have a say, then that's a problem. And over the years, I've come to fully understand. I was like, if you want to talk about it, that's fine. But just realize that not everyone on your team has these same political views as you, just like people at work and all of that. Just be respectful and all that jazz. And just to compare the media coverage, I don't have the exact stats, but something similar, which happened in the NBA many years ago with Donald Sterling, who was forced to sell his team. And to me, honest, the only reason he was forced is because his mistress had the recording of him saying what he said. If that recording didn't exist, I think he's still on the team to this day. And then the players were talking about the Clippers and Doc Rivers, the coach. They did throw the shirts down, talked about not playing. And this was all during like Trayvon Martin and things of that nature. And you even said that the Atlanta Dream women they didn't have to play, they wouldn't play. But I would also go back to something we've talked about on previous ones, that it's a lot easier for the NBA players not to play because they make 10 to 100 times more money than what a WNBA player makes. And I agree with you that the dream, if it came down to it, those women would not play. But I wouldn't fault them if they did, especially if they're the only breadwinner in the family of kids and parents and all of that. And they're not playing overseas because of COVID now. So they don't make that type of money to just not get a check for a year. That's not how it works, because they don't get paid that much. I'm sure someone would come and help from the other side, but you can never guarantee that. But I'm just proud of us for covering this from the beginning all the way to the end. It'll be interesting to see what that group does. And I don't know if this is going to change Kelly's thoughts on stuff. And Mary Brock, the other owner, she still looks like she's on a trustee of all of her stuff. So good on her. But you gotta know. You gotta know the climate of where you're working, because that's not good. But speaking of climates and working and saying things at the wrong place at the wrong time, Michelle Wie, for those who don't know, because I actually don't think we've talked golf on here. She is a world class golfer, one of the best, not just females, but one of the best overall golfers on planet Earth right now. And she was drawn into some controversy. Rudy Giuliani, for those who do not speak in politics, don't know him, he was actually a former personal attorney to President Trump. There, obviously, he's not working for him anymore. He was appearing on the Steve Bannon's War Room podcast, and they were talking about Rush Limbaugh, who recently passed away. He was an influential right-wing talk show radio host, for those who do not know as well. And they were talking about a golf outing with Limbaugh and Wie. And Giuliani was talking about how there's a whole bunch of paparazzi around, and they thought it was for Limbaugh, but they said that they were out there for Michelle. And this was his quote on the green is Michelle Wie, and she's getting ready to putt. Now, Michelle Wie is gorgeous. She's 6 feet. She has a strange putting stance, and she bends all the way over, and her panties show, and the press was going crazy. They're trying to take pictures of her panties. And I said, Rush, it's not me, it's not you, it's her panties. Giuliani ended the story by asking, is it okay to tell that joke? Well, we already told it, so I don't know. Banning responded. And then a whole bunch of things came out from that. People talking about why that was brought up, things of that nature. Michelle Wie obviously said something because they were talking about her. So, Chelsea, what did you think about all of this when it came out?
I mean, it's disgusting. Number one, like there should never be a point where a woman's undergarment should be the center of a conversation. Like I don't know what else to say beyond that. Like, we think about, what women have to wear during sports. We know with tennis, they typically wear skirts, although that's changing a little bit. And I think again, Serena has been a big part of that change. Like she didn't wear a skirt for the Australian Open. So things are changing, but it has been, this understanding in certain sports that women wear certain things, and, that's just been upheld forever. And, golf is no different. Oftentimes they wear skirts, skirts might have shorts, may not, just kind of depends. And so, we're putting women in this position to be scrutinized for things other than the sport they're playing. And attire is a huge part of that. How many times do we see with certain, tennis and golf, I think are really good examples where the outfits that the women in particular wear are talked about incessantly. I mean, Serena was asked about what she was wearing at the Australian Open. And I think part of that is because it was an ode to FloJo, and she was really proud of the outfit she ultimately picked. And that's part of Serena. She's like a fashion designer. Her sister's a designer as well. And so that's part of their identity to some extent. But you don't see people asking that to the men. And, I hate to blame the patriarchy, so to speak, but in reality, that is kind of what's happened. We have these unreal expectations for women as athletes in terms of what they look like, what they wear, and they're supposed to be pleasing to the eye in some respects. And I can't tell you the number of times that announcers and commentators have, mentioned something about a woman's appearance, but don't do the same thing for men. And so, this whole thing with Michelle Wie, like it's just disgusting that men feel that they can have those conversations and don't think that there's going to be any repercussions, that it's okay to do that, that it is their right to talk about a woman's body, or, what they're wearing, or, when something like that happens, like she's out there to play a sport. If something like her undergarments start showing, it shouldn't be a topic of conversation. Like you should just move on, whatever. You wouldn't do that with a man. Now, obviously, men typically wear pants on the golf course, maybe shorts, whatever. So there's not that likelihood of happening. But again, it goes back to the expectations that are set for women, and really it shouldn't be tolerated. And there should be no reason that two grown ass men are having a conversation about another woman's body on a podcast. Like that shouldn't happen, shouldn't be recounting that incident whenever it happened. And certainly, Michelle Wie shouldn't have to defend herself for something that she wore that day. It shouldn't happen.
So when I first saw this one that you shared with me, this was actually around the same time that I recorded with the other Chelsea Hepper, when we did Framing Britney Spears. And ever since watching that documentary, I already knew the stuff was going on, but it really omegally opened my eyes to this type of stuff. It's not as bad as Spears dealt with as 10, but it's still bad. And just reading what I just said about Giuliani saying that, not just a former lawyer to the president of the United States, but he was also mayor of New York, one of the two. And this is again with PR. I don't think this would be news if he just stopped at, they weren't here to see us, they were here to see Michelle Wie. You could have stopped at, she is gorgeous, okay, and then that would have been it. She's gorgeous, she's a great golfer. They weren't here to see us, they were here to see her. You would have said that. I don't even think this is a non-issue. It's her bringing up her underwear, and even if you knew they were taking pictures of her underwear, which to me, I don't doubt him on that, because the media is crazy. And I mean, TMZ and all of that and all those people are there. I actually don't doubt him that they were doing that. But you could have took an initiative there as a former lawyer to the president saying, hey, this isn't okay. You shouldn't be taking pictures of her underwear, or even just pulling her aside saying, hey, just to let you know, those people were taking pictures of your underwear. So make sure you go and reach out to them and tell them not to post the stuff and all that. Like he could have done those things, but the way that he said it in a jokingly term, and then it went from just focusing on her underwear, which, like you've already said, is a problem. But I think this is another example of there's still a lot of work to be done with talking about women and sports and all of that. But I do remember too, you brought up Serena. I don't know if she got a lot of heat, but there was one time, I forgot which tournament, that she wore the cat suit or something like that. And she got some black.
Yeah, the French Open actually banned cat suits after she wore that. So again, it's a situation where a tournament is effectively telling women what they can and cannot wear. I mean, they essentially said that they have to wear a skirt at the French Open, and like Wimbledon, you have to wear white as part of, being at the All England Club. But I don't think they necessarily say what all white has to be, whether it's a skirt or, something else. But the French Open, did come out and say that they had to wear a skirt, which, Serena actually wore the cat suit for medical reasons. She was dealing with blood clots in her legs. And so having the compression, material or whatever all the way down her legs was helping with circulation and making sure that she didn't get another blood clot. So it wasn't that she was just saying like, F the patriarchy, I'm going to wear this cat suit. She was doing it for a medical reason. And then the French Open's like, no, sorry, you can't do that anymore. And so I think that's, it made that cat suit so iconic because somebody came back and made a rule and said you can't do it anymore. But also like, it's also devastating because they're dictating what she can and can't do, even though she was doing it so that she effectively stayed alive and didn't have any more health issues as a result.
Yeah. And with Michelle too, because I had to read up on her. She's not even that much older than us. I think she's only a couple years older than us. She's about 31. And it's the age old thing with women and sports and clothing and all that. And even not even just sports, just general newscasters, all that. It's damned if you do, damned if you don't. If you don't look sexy enough, you're not getting a shot. Point blank. It's unless you're omegally talented, you're not getting a shot if you don't look a certain way. If you do look a certain way, all it takes is, in this case, one older white male to say, oh, she's too sexy. Now we have a problem. And then you're just to be honest, you're getting slut shamed by tweets and posts and all that stuff. And then, that's not good for any person's mental health. And sometimes you have to deactivate your accounts and things like that. But if you have sponsors, you really can't do that either. So you have to just sit there and take it. And that's not good for anyone. So it's that age old thing. Damned if you do want to look sexy, damned if you don't. If you don't want to look sexy, me personally, I truly don't care. If you're good at the sport and you're fine, whatever, do what you want to do. Like, I'm more interested if you're good at this or if you suck at this.
Yeah, and I think a really good example of that is with Maria Taylor earlier in 2020 when there was a man who basically said she was dressed like a porn star when she was on the sideline. I can't remember if it was college or an NFL game, but that person ended up getting fired for his comment. And again, it's one of those situations where you, as somebody randomly on Twitter, if you're a reporter or just some Joe Schmo, like you have no room to talk about another individual's appearance. Like, and if you want to do that with your friends or your buddies, sure, whatever, more power to you. But don't put it on the internet where everybody can see it. And then you're going to get absolutely destroyed by people who are like, that doesn't make sense. Or you're going to create a firestorm where people are going to agree. And it's just going to get so out of hand. Like it just, you don't need to do that. And then it, it goes back to people deleting tweets and all this stuff or deactivating their accounts. Like, again, if you're going to take that chance, you're going to take that shot, then be ready to take on the repercussions and the backlash and whatever else you might get. And don't be somebody who just instantly deletes their account and can't handle it. So, I mean, we've talked about that plenty, and that happens all the time. But yeah, I think that's a really good example of that situation where women just get it from anyone and everybody who wants to make a comment about what they're wearing or doing, and there's just no win-win situation for them. And that's really unfortunate, because there are a lot of great women who are on the field, who are on sidelines that are reporting, who are in, positions of power, and there's just nothing that they can do, to make someone happy based on what they're wearing or what they're doing.
Yeah, and the Maria thing too. I mean, she had a bad couple of weeks because she had that, and I remember the guy was from Chicago, and then she also had the NBA mess up with not having Anthony Davis on one of the All NBA teams. That was back-to-back weeks, and to me, I was like, yeah, that's the wrong move. But again, I didn't know if she was still dealing with, because I don't have her cell phone number, so I didn't know if she was still dealing with the backlash of that, or she just honestly forgot, and then people asking how she's on Countdown when she was on this and that and College Game Day. But no, it's one of those things that will never go away with women. Even just take it even further with sports. It's for all the other stuff. It's damned if you do, damned if you don't. But those people who, let's say with like a Michelle Wie, are saying, oh, she dresses like a slut, things like that, saying that because of the way she golfs or the clothes she wears, are the same people who, and there's no problem with that either, on Instagram, liking all of the Instagram models, pictures, and all of that, who are dressed the exact same, if not more scandalous. And also to that too, that's your own personal preference. I mean, we're all trying to make money and make a living, and you have to do what you have to do, but you shouldn't have to. It's not in your place to criticize what another person looks like. That's not your business. And I mean, everyone has their personal preferences on what they like physically and all of that, but Michelle wasn't there to model. She wasn't there to flash anyone. She was there to play golf, and for that to be the main story was terrible.
Yeah, I mean, the bottom line is that just because a woman wears something, that is deemed sexy or, attractive, or they are attractive as a human being, whatever it is, that is not permission for a man, woman, anybody to comment on that appearance, to discredit them for being attractive or looking good in their respective field. Or just being flat out nasty. That is not an invitation to do that. And you wouldn't want someone to do that to you. And just because they're in the public eye doesn't give you the permission to do so. And so, yeah, I mean, that for me is the bottom line. Like, I would, if you're not going to say it to their face, don't hide behind your keyboard and say it to them on the internet. Because at the end of the day, yes, they may have a platform. They may be out there for the public because they are in the public eye, and they might share parts of their lives that other people don't. But again, that doesn't give you permission to comment on the things that they do, and to be rude and to be nasty, and to make comments that you wouldn't say to them in everyday life. Like, that's just not okay.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny too, because this next one that we're going to hit real quick, I don't even know if it'll be real quick. It's almost the exact same thing. Twitch gamer Negaoryx tweeted about she was playing a game. I actually don't remember which game she was playing, but a person in the comments while she's playing the game, just out of the blue, asked her what color underwear was she wearing, and she was just, and then she talked about how that's not right, things of that nature. And the same thing Rudy did. This guy's like, oh, you can't take a joke. So these are two completely different sports, obviously Twitch and golf, but literally the same exact thing, except this guy, we don't know who he is, and we obviously know who Rudy is, but it's the same thing, and it's something that women deal with every day, even in the gaming world. I know we haven't hit that much on it, but even in the gaming world, when you're just there playing, random people coming in there asking sexist things about what color your underwear or what size of your breasts or things like that. And like you will say, like they would have never asked a man that, and that's what women have to deal with every day. And then if you don't answer them or things like that, they're just berating in your comments, and then they're ruining the stream for other people, and you could potentially lose followers and what that. And that was another thing that you also shared with me as well.
Yeah, and I think what I said before, still follows suit here. And again, to your point, like a male streamer or gamer or whatever isn't going to deal with the same things. Like there is not going to be somebody that's going to, ask them a personal question about what they're wearing or anything like that in that setting, because they know that that won't be tolerated. But they feel like that they have the space and the avenue to do it when you have a female streamer or gamer or whatever you call them in that respect. And I have seen kind of firsthand. My fiance is a gamer, and so like there are things that happen in that respect where if you know that it's a female, that people will say things, and I just think that's unfair. And truthfully, you never really know, when gaming, who's on the other side of that keyboard. Obviously, in this situation, she's a streamer. She makes herself visible to those who watch her streams. But in most cases, you don't know. And maybe from their gamer tag or whatever, but it's, again, there's no reason that you should be having or saying anything like that or asking those questions. And I know from her situation, she started to feel very unsafe and unsettled by those comments. And again, that should just never happen. Like there should never be an instance where you're making somebody feel that uncomfortable, that they feel unsafe in their own homes, or, in their, something that they probably view as like their safety or their, escape from what's going on in the world. And suddenly you're asking really personal questions and you're starting to impede on that feeling of escapism. And that's just not fair to that individual. They didn't ask for that. And before you tell me, well, they're the ones that decided to stream, you're right, they did. But they did not decide to stream with the idea that someone was going to come in and ask them what color their underwear is, anything personal about them, their appearance, whether they're, attractive or anything like that. And don't tell me that you think that that's why they do it, because I'll tell you right now, it's not.
Yeah, and with this too, the same thing I said about damned if you do, damned if you don't, and this even goes into the gaming world too, because there have been women who have gone to extreme lengths to make sure they have a consistent following, from literally streaming in swimsuit or their underwear, or fake giving lap dances or whatever, and they've done that because they felt like that was the only way they could get ahead. And statistically, that was showing that the women who did do that got more followers than the people who didn't. And I mean, if you're comfortable doing that, again, that is your personal thing. My biggest thing is that you shouldn't have to feel like you have to do that to get ahead. Someone like Ninja, who makes $30 million a year playing video games, which don't tell your parents that, because our parents back in the day would say that's a joke, but 30 mil playing video games. He came out a long time ago saying that he'll never collab with like a female streamer out of respect for his wife or something like that. And again, that's your personal thing. That makes sense, but you're denying a whole great group of women who could honestly use the rub from you, because it's like, oh, because some guys are ego driven and they're just like, oh, this girl's hanging with Ninja, she must be really good, I should follow her, and things like that. And also from a Ninja thing, just because you collab with a girl doesn't mean they want to sleep with you on.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, I think that's what says more about Ninja than it does about anybody else. And, if he doesn't feel like he can, I don't know, contain himself in an environment like that, then to be perfectly honest, as a female, I don't know that I want to put myself in that position, because, you know, if something were to happen, or, you know, something gets misconstrued, it's going to be on it's going to be the female's fault. It's going to be that female streamer's fault for that happening. And Ninja's going to take no part in that blame. And whether or not he should, you know, obviously we're talking hypotheticals right now, but you know that he's going to be completely innocent in all of this, and it's going to come down to it being her fault because of many of the things that we've already talked about in terms of appearance, and you know, she asked for it, or she did this and she did that, and you know, we know that that's not always the case, but we want to blame somebody, or our society wants to blame someone, and typically it falls on the woman in that case. And again, that says more about him than it does about anybody else if he's not able to, you know, have a business relationship with somebody that is a woman because of, you know, respect for his wife. Like that's bullshit in my opinion.
Last thing we really have, we couldn't have a podcast and not talk about the women's national soccer team. And Chelsea, you're the one who told me about this, and this is near and dear to your heart, so I'm just going to let you explain this.
Yeah, so watching the She Believes Cup last week, 2 weeks ago, whatever it was, in the middle of the US's final game, it was halftime show. They bring in, and I don't even know who the individual was, but it was somebody to talk about the US men's national team potential Olympic roster, like Olympic qualifying, leading to Tokyo. Now, you know, you may think that that's not a huge deal, but here's the problem that I have with this. Number one, to be perfectly honest, most people who are watching the US women's national team really don't care about the US men's national team. And there's a lot of history there, and there's a lot of reasons why that is. So for them to bring on an individual to talk about the men's national team during a women's contest is not great. Like, I hated every second of it. You know, I saw several tweets that are like, we don't care about the men's national team right now. We are watching the US women's national team. Why are we not discussing their potential roster? Because to be perfectly honest, the Olympic roster is 18. We as a national team, the women, could probably make 2 Olympic teams and compete for gold and silver. Like, that's how deep we are. And so Vlatko Andonovski is going to have a very difficult decision to narrow that roster down from what it is now to 18. You know, we have a ton of players who are solid, who are great, who, you know, are going to be disappointed because they're going to be left off the roster. When you have the likes of Carly Lloyd, Alex Morgan, Megan Rapinoe, you know, Julie Ertz, like, it just, the list is endless. And so that halftime show, number one, should have been talking about highlights from the game. Number two, should have been talking about the Olympic roster for the women's national team. There should be no conversation in there where we're talking about the men. Now, maybe you are talking about them because they have an upcoming friendly, or you just want to plug that they have some games upcoming. I don't have any problem with that, but I have a problem spending 20 or 25 minutes in between halves talking solely about the men's national team. That should never happen. And part of me says that that would not happen in a reverse scenario, where if I was watching a US men's national team game, was in the middle of a tournament that they created, which, mind you, this tournament is called the She Believes Cup. So why are we talking about men in the middle of this? That's a whole different issue. But again, that would not happen if the roles were reversed. And it doesn't happen in the same way that it does. And I think, I don't know what goes through producers' minds, or, you know, the people who organize these when they do that. It's almost as if they're like, you know, nobody really cares about women's soccer, so we're going to plug the men in this situation, and hopefully that garners some views and people are excited and stick around for the second half. When, mind you, the entire tournament, the entire She Believes Cup, the women's national team averaged 532,000 viewers for 3 games. Across 3 games, they average 530,000 viewers. That's a ton, and that's record breaking. So don't come at me and say that you need to pull the men's national team in because you think that's going to keep people interested. And so I was livid about this whole situation. And again, if the roles were reversed, I genuinely believe that this would not have happened.
How long is a woman's halftime show?
I don't know. Their halftime for soccer games probably 20-ish minutes. I honestly haven't timed one, and I haven't been to a game in forever to actually know. But I would say no more than about 20 minutes because the whole broadcast for a game is 2 hours. And so there's 90 minutes for the game. And so there's a little bit 30 minutes of extra, additional time in that broadcast, but it could be that there's some extra time at the end of one or both halves that eats into that a little bit. So I would say somewhere around 20 minutes.
So if that's somewhere around 20 minutes, and you just even said that they spent maybe about 15 to 20, 25 minutes talking about the men. So that entire halftime show, they were talking about the men's soccer team, and you already said that they didn't do highlights. They didn't talk about the roster and how this team could fill 2 rosters and the cuts that are going to need to be made. And you told me about this. I was probably watching Ohio State college basketball, I think something like that. And I asked if this was a common thing, and you said no. And with the thing, if it was reversed, would this happen? I don't think it would happen. What station was it? Was it on Fox?
Yeah. And, to be honest, I can actually think about times when this has happened in other sports. So there are, so many times when you're watching a women's college basketball game and the commentators will, hype up a men's game that's coming up or talk about any kind of men's sporting event that's happening in the distant future. It could be tomorrow or on Friday or some random day during the week that nobody is even thinking about yet. But here's this random game that's happening. And that'll be brought up during a women's broadcast. And maybe that happens once or twice in the reverse, where if we're watching a men's basketball game or football game or something where a women's sport is brought up. And I think a good example of that would be where that does happen is around tournament time. I think that's about the only time that we really see that happening in the reverse. But for the most part, during the regular season, if women's basketball is on, you'll see any number of, previews or plugs about men's games that are happening later that day, tomorrow, 3 days from now. And so it's this idea that men's sports are the only thing that bring viewers. And we have seen over the last 6 to 8 months, that's just not the case. And so if you market and you plan to make sure that people know that these events are happening from a women's perspective, people are going to show up and they're going to watch them. That is the reality, but people don't take the time to make sure that happens. And again, going back to less than 4% of media coverage is devoted to women's sports. You could easily change that by, putting more women's sports on. And we've seen that a little bit, I think, partially due to the pandemic and just not having any other options. But I hope to see that is a trend that continues. And I think, we have seen as of late, we talked about the Atlanta Dream and that new ownership, but in the NWSL, there have been 3 massive investor groups that have started to pop up with the Washington Spirit, the Chicago Red Stars. Kansas City has some big names that have invested in that group. Naomi Osaka is now an owner of the North Carolina Courage. The LAFC has a huge ownership group with a lot of massive names, including Serena Williams. Mia Hamm is a part of that. So we're starting to see people investing in women's sports. And more than that, it's women investing in women's sports. And, I think that's great. I think that's huge. Finally, women are saying, okay, nobody else is going to invest in us. We're going to take this into our own hands and make it happen and make it work. And, we saw that with Alex Morgan and Sue Bird, Simone Manuel and Chloe Kim, just launching their own media company. So they're finally saying, okay, we've dealt with this less than 4% of coverage for all of our playing careers. We're putting a stop to that, and we're finding a way to give more coverage to women and to, provide our own stories and our own, roadmaps to what it's like to be an athlete and be a woman in sport. And so I think there is this changing of the guard, so to speak, with women's sports and what's happening in the future. And women are finally saying, we're done waiting on others. We're going to take this into our own hands. We're going to show people that women's sports are huge, they're up and coming, and that you need to be a part of this movement. Otherwise, you're going to be left in the dust. And, I love it. And I think it's great that it's happening in the month of March and coinciding with Women's History Month and Black History Month in February. And just, it's been really, really cool to see just how much things have grown just in the last few months. And I hope that these like investor groups and ownership groups that are built by women for women continue to be the trend, and that people finally figure out that women's sports are here to stay, as I've said a million times on this podcast. So yeah, I got off a little bit on a tangent there, but I think that women's sports are going in the right direction, and people just need to get on board. And bottom line is, don't talk about men's sports during women's sports. Like we don't want to hear about it, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah. So I'll make it short for just that with the game is if that happens on both. So if the men are playing and the women are the halftime, like same 20 minutes, and it's even between them, I really don't have a problem with that. Now, if it's only the men getting shown on the women's games and then vice versa, then that doesn't really jive with me. So either do it evenly for both or don't do it at all. And I don't even think it should be 20 minutes. If it's hey, men are playing Mexico on Tuesday on FS1, check it out. Perfect. But make sure you're doing the same thing for the women. Oh, the women are playing Brazil on ABC at 6 p.m. Make sure you check it out. So I think the promotions need to be equal. And like you said, with the media companies and things like that, it really comes down to who runs the places. Like if they don't want to talk about it, they're not gonna talk about it. And how these companies are ran. I mean, just even going back to like the GOAT thing and like seeing ESPN like First Take do their GOAT stuff, and Sarita was on most people's like their top 5 or something, but that's because you can't leave her out. But there's a whole bunch of soccer players, women, and obviously Simone. So it's whatever these companies cover that they want to bolster out. Chelsea, is there anything else you wanted to talk about? I actually wanted to make sure I actually let you did the closing today, since it is Women's History Month. So I wanted to make sure you got to close this episode. So if there's nothing else you want to talk about, I'll go into my little closing bit and then you will close it out for us.
Okay.
Well, with me, obviously, thank you everyone for listening to the L7C podcast. Thank you, Chelsea, for being on there and being our queen. Just even want to give you more props as we are in Women's History Month, and you are obviously the first woman to come on the podcast. And then since then, there have been 2 others who are now, I think, going to be in the general rotation. And there are more women who want to be on. And then just like we talked about, representation matters. And even on our Mom and Pop podcast, you being a trailblazer that you are, being one of the top 3 most listened people on here, has shown that even just the normal women that we're friends with, that they can do this, and people want to hear a woman's perspective. I think that's the biggest thing that with representation and all of that, there are people out there who want to hear a woman's perspective. They just don't have the outlet for it. No matter how big or how small you are, if you don't have the outlet, it's hard to get your voice out there. And we've tried to provide that for women. And obviously, you're the first, and you've inspired others. So just want to give you your props on that. And with it being Women's History Month, the 8th is International Women's Day. I'll be honest, outside of like the major holidays, I don't know when any of these start. I thought the first time it started, which they're marketing geniuses, of course, Marvel, because they released Captain Marvel on International Women's Day of that year. So I was just like, didn't know it was International Women's Day. Perfect for Marvel on their part. But with any of these holidays and the importance, I mean, you just gotta respect women. There's no one on planet Earth who does not have a woman in their life. So just going back to the panties thing with the gamer, Negaoryx and Michelle Wie, I mean, that was your sister. You really don't want random dudes just running up on her, taking pictures of her underwear, talking about it like that. If she was your sister, mom, aunt, cousin, all of that bit. So just always think of that. And to go back to the GOAT thing, because we pay respect to all sports, forgot to talk about UFC GOATs as well. John Jones, Amanda Nunes, who I think those two are the top two ever. So boy and a girl. And that's really, and also Layla Ali, another GOAT. She should be on there as well. Her just beating the hell out of everybody. So yeah, that's really all I have. And I will pass it to the queen to close.
Yeah, I think, knowing that it's Women's History Month and then, with International Women's Day approaching, I just would challenge all of you out there that listen to this episode to check out a women's sport at some point this month, whether it's the NWSL, whether it's, softball. NCAA softball is in full swing now, women's hockey, women's basketball, whatever it is. I challenge you to kind of take a few minutes and watch some of those. And I think that you'll be pleasantly surprised with what you see and ultimately might make yourself become a fan of a new sport or a new just entity to watch. Because, I have said time and time again, I love to watch women's sports. I've been around them my entire life. And I think it's really important that people themselves watch. And if you've never spent the time watching a women's athletic competition, like I just encourage you to do that, or watch something that you've never watched before. Give them a chance and don't let what, the media has said or individuals have said about nobody cares about women's sports, because that's just not true. You want to be a part of the change, and we are, as a society, kind of shifting to more equity and giving more opportunities to women to really show what it is they can do. And again, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. And, if one day you have a daughter, you want to make sure that they have every opportunity as somebody else. So take a few minutes and watch some women's sports, even if it's maybe not something live. You could watch some highlights from some Olympic Games. If you really want to watch somebody, watch Simone. She's impressive. So yeah, just as my challenge to you would just be give women's sports a chance, give them an opportunity to show, how great they are and the potential for them to grow in the future and be part of the change to make that something that's common in society. So that's really all I have. I appreciate the opportunity as always to come on and love kind of talking about something that's just near and dear to my heart.
And with that being said, thank you everyone for listening to the L7C podcast. You guys take care. Thank you for listening to this episode of the L7C podcast. Be sure to like, rate, review, and subscribe to the channel. Follow us on all social media platforms, and we'll be talking to you guys soon. Take care.